sometimes 5, 6, 7 times a day in direct contact with a very well-trained enemy force. But one of their tactics was to stage weapons throughout the city, stage them in your home. And you could imagine just working at a normal job. I don't care what you do for a living. Maybe you make coffee at Starbucks or you work at IBM. I don't know, something benign. But someone rolls into your house and puts a gun to your head or a gun to your kid's head and says, I'm leaving these weapons in this closet. If you tell the Americans where it is, we'll come back and kill you.
Hey everybody, this episode is brought to you by the Freeman team at Spire Financial. Spire Financial is a national leader specializing in VA loans serving our veteran community. Contact the Freeman team at Spire Financial today and learn how to get your VA loan offer accepted through our Spire Key approval. This story will be told for years to come. Next up, retired Marine Infantry Officer Scott Heusing with 24 years military service and 10 deployments. He was the company commander of Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, and led his Marines in some of the deadliest battles in Iraq.
By coming to David in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and cue David.
Scott, you ready to do this?
Let's do it.
Again, the majority of this conversation is going to be meaningful for me because it's going to bring me a little bit back to my Iraq days when we talk about that, but I got to tell the funniest story in the world about how we met. For everybody listening, Scott and I met for the first time in Scottsdale, Arizona. We were out to lunch at Tommy Bahama, never met each other prior, never even communicated. We go to exchange phone numbers. You give me your phone number, I dial it in my phone, ring, ring, it rings on your phone, and it comes up, The Drew Thompson Show.
Yep.
You can see why that's funny.
Yeah, well,
because it's the David Johnson Show, not the Drew Thompson Show.
Like, who the hell is Drew Thompson?
I'm honored my number was in your phone.
Well, the context of it too is like I signed a book for you. We took a selfie and you said, "Hey, I'm gonna send you that." So you sent it. I said,
"Oh, that's what." Yeah.
I said,
that's
"Why does it say Drew Thompson?"
Yeah. So how was I? We never found out.
And then what's funnier is
I know where you're going.
Tell us because you text the picture or you post on Facebook at lunch.
So what's funnier is I posted the picture of you and I, and then my sister-in-law reaches out in Texas, and she's like, "You're with Scott?" I'm like, "How the hell do you even know Scott?" Because my brother at a silent auction, I think, purchased one of the items for a fundraiser.
Yeah, so I'm in Houston, Texas for a nonprofit charity event, and we all go down, and it was me and Dan Crenshaw and a couple other people. We autographed a pair of our shitty, smelly combat boots and auctioned them off, and these really sexy girls walked the runway with them, and I'm sitting with your brother and his wife.
That's crazy.
And they actually had the winning bid for my boots, so they were the high bid, like $5,500 for a pair of my stinky combat boots, and then. I mean, that's the story. So
did you tell him I'm coming on the show? Because he texted me like 3 days ago. He's like, I heard Scott's coming on the show.
Oh, for sure.
Oh, you did tell him? Okay,
sure.
good.
I'm like, hey, I'm going on the Drew Thompson Show. Like,
all right, well, big shout out to my brother Mike and my sister-in-law Kara in Texas. Always been there. But, I want to dive right in. And for the next 10 or 15 minutes, just bear with me because I want to really set the stage of the early days of GWAT, especially in Iraq, and there's a few key points I want to discuss with you. And you know a little bit of my background. I had my 21st, 22nd, 23rd birthday in Iraq, so I have some strong opinions. And you said some stuff here that we're going to get into, and I want your first opinion on that. And a lot of people, I only did 6 years and got out. I always say, sometimes I regret getting out. I'm not that dude that did 20 plus, got out. So to me, my time in Iraq, I remember it was 17, 18 years ago. I remember like it was yesterday. But a very key point I want to make because, and it actually hit me on another episode, we were talking about, we just had a gentleman on that was in the first Gulf War. And he was talking about, divisions, brigade, 2 enemies fighting each other, 2 tanks on a battlefield, forward, march, ready, fight. Whereas in early Iraq days, it was not like that. There was an insurgency, and to that point, you say in one of the chapters in your book, it was never black and white when we found Iraqis with weapons in their homes. We never knew if they were victims of the insurgency or part of it. But unless they were pointing and shooting the weapons at us, we were not allowed to engage with them. So paint this picture real quick about who was the enemy, who were you actually fighting in those early days?
Well, that was a tough thing to discern, because what most people don't realize is when you're fighting an insurgency, you're fighting it amongst the population. And for the most part, as you know, that population was predominantly filled with peace-loving Iraqis,
Totally.
peace-loving Afghans in a totally separate theater, which is like apples and oranges.
Yeah.
But in Iraq, the insurgents lived amongst the people. And when we fought, as I wrote about in Ramadi, this is a city of over 300,000 people. 300,000 people. So you can equate that to Phoenix or Scottsdale, for that matter, here in Arizona. It's a large, well-developed city. It's been around for a long, long time. So you never really knew who the enemy was, but it was this constant day in, day out fighting. Very well-trained enemy, and we were fighting sometimes 5, 6, 7 times a day in direct contact with a very well-trained enemy force. But one of their tactics was to stage weapons throughout the city, stage them in your home, and you could imagine just working at a normal job. I don't care what you do for a living. Maybe you make coffee at Starbucks, or you work at IBM. I don't know, something benign. But someone rolls into your house and puts a gun to your head or a gun to your kid's head and says, I'm leaving these weapons in this closet. If you tell the Americans where it is, we'll come back and kill you.
Right.
So we fought amongst the city, amongst the people that wanted us there. So they were very torn. Do we tell the Americans and hope that they kill all the insurgents at some point? Or do I risk my own and my family's safety?
And you had a mix between the two.
And you really do. And it was a lawless, ruthless regime that was rolling through that city at that time. It's not hyperbole that it was absolutely the deadliest city in Iraq at the time in 2006 and 2007.
And part of the problem is when we went in there in 03 and in the later years, I mean, everything that makes a city, a police force, an army, a government, maybe a banking system, down to the sanitation people in the streets. I mean, I say everything was wiped out. I mean, it was sort of like the wild, wild west.
That's the best analogy I ever use. Or the Star Wars cantina, where you've got like all of these strange rangers, from diplomats to business professional to tactical casual to active duty military. All these people are rolling around in the city trying to do all these things, not only as the military's primary mission, kill or capture anti-Iraqi forces, but you had other people there with similarly aligned missions to establish governance, to build infrastructure, because we talk a lot about this word democracy. And what the American public loves to talk about is American democracy. And America has this fascination with fast food, fast ATM cash, this fast food culture. And they also want fast democracy. But that doesn't ever happen. I think that we've seen this recently, just within this week in Afghanistan, with the withdrawal of U.S. forces. Is the sentiment in America is, we're done with this war. 20 years is long enough. Well, what we really failed to do in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and it applies to both, is be good students of history. And we can just use World War II for that example in the Pacific and European theaters, where after years and years and years of waging war and laying waste to entire continent in the Pacific Rim and in Japan and Okinawa and the island campaign that we had, we stayed. We stayed, and it took 50 years.
Right.
And now you look at the end result of that is we are trade partners and allies with these countries because they finally figured out what right looks like. They finally figured out that you can't just say, I want to plant a seed here and it's called democracy. And it's not American democracy or French democracy or British democracy. It's democracy. There's only one flavor.
So we're going to get into that. Back in these early days in Iraq, the insurgents, do you think they saw, as us as occupiers, and we're trying to just come over and take over your land? That's their version of what we were doing there?
I think that was probably the narrative that most of them wanted to digest. But when you're talking about Islamic extremists that have this gross misinterpretation of the Quran, and they use that to really get across their hateful ideology and impose Sharia law in whatever sense they want, they're going to use that. That's the blanket that they sleep in every night. And to get most Americans to really understand how evil that really is, you have to experience that. And it was another gross failure from our perspective at the administrative level all the way down to the tactical level is our lack of understanding of culture when we go into these different theaters of operation. And we have to understand what their culture is, how the enemy sees us, and then how to develop a strategy from the administrative and strategic, operational, all the way down to that tactical level on how we're going to apply force. And then really define this question: what is winning? What is winning to us as a nation? What is winning to those guys who are kicking doors in and killing bad guys day in and day out? And then how does all that apply to enhance and bolster our national security as a country? That's my question.
We'll get into that as well. Speaking of winning then, do you think when we went in there, Iraq, like I said, the early days, we anticipated the complete breakdown of every form of organization they had? I mean, we had to rebuild their army. We had to rebuild their police force. We had to rebuild, basically, now we're nation building. Did you think we anticipated that?
Well, I guess my question to you would be, who's we?
I guess whoever was leading the charge, the U.S., the shot callers, if you will, the higher echelon commanders at the time.
Well, I've said this.
And the point I'm getting at, and sorry to interrupt, I guess, I mean, I'm trying to just, because it hit me that when you said that about, we don't even know who's who, and then you go also later in the book to talk about, we can't. These insurgents would go inside mosques, and we can't shoot at mosques because different rules of engagement or whatever have you. It's like we're trying to fight this war. Who are we fighting, and with what regulation are we trying to fight this with?
Well, the ROEs, the rules of engagement that were placed in front of us as tactical level warfighters, I think, again, were based off of cultural sensitivities. I think at that time it was President George W. Bush. He was very quick to take off the iron fist and slip on that velvet glove and transition into peacekeeping and stability operations. And I think that really hurt our cause. And
I agree.
I was just recently this week, I'll share this with you. I was so overwhelmed with everything going on in social media and mainstream media, with everything going on, the unfolding of the events in Iraq. I just grabbed a book off the shelf, and I didn't care what it was. It was totally random, and I walked outside, I sat down on my patio, and I started reading it. It was an old version that my dad had given me from 1908. It was Jack London's Call of the Wildlands. I'm reading this book, and I'm no more than, 20, 30 pages in, and there's a passage in it. Have you read the book Call of the Wild? It's about this dog. He's one of the best crossbred dogs, and they trap him and they want to transfer him to be this amazing sled dog. But at the outset of the story, he's put into a crate and he's shipped on railroad cars and he's beaten down, and then they finally put the collar around his neck and a rope, and they're moving him. And when he finally gets to the one handler that's going to own this, he gives him the worst beating of his life, just beats him down. And Buck, who's the dog, who's given personification by London in the story, he looks at this man and he says, I will never be able to win a fight against a man with a stick. And I read that, and I couldn't help but see it as a metaphor for what's happening in Afghanistan, because now, through diplomatic and administrative channels, we've effectively now removed the stick and the man from Afghanistan. So now, essentially, you've got all of these dogs running around thinking they can bite whoever they want. That's what's happened by not leaving a presence in Afghanistan like we did in Europe and in the Pacific Rim, like I was talking about earlier.
Interesting.
So, and I don't know what that number is. Is it 2,000? Is it a battalion? Is it 5,000? But absolutely leaving a stability force there, so we always have a stick. Because in that culture, again, going back to culture, that culture understands one thing: the guy with the biggest stick wins.
So that's my entire point. Saddam was in power. Some say at least he kept a lid on it, right? I mean, good, bad, or indifferent, he kept a lid on Iraq. We come in, we take out everything that brings any organization to that country, and then just this chaos of insurgency in 03, 04, 05 Iraq days. Follow me on this journey. I want to switch gears a little bit to just talk about a little bit of the psychology. Well, the psychology is the wrong word. What it means to be in your position as a Marine, as a commander, because you had to lead a company-sized element. We can get into break that down. We have a lot of listeners that may not know what that means. 4 platoons, what that means. But you recently had a change of duty station when you took over command of Echo Company, if I'm not mistaken, and you were talking about, you didn't even get an apartment. You slept in your office on base, and you said, Mike, my closeness to my Marines produced many benefits, the most important of which was that I got to know the Marines that I would ultimately be putting my confidence in, while they got to know the man they'd be entrusting their lives with as we fought in Ramadi. What does that mean to be a company commander? You have, I don't want to say a bunch of kids. I mean, age-wise, maybe a bunch of kids as you just compare it. But what does that mean to command that and knowing you're going to go to war here shortly?
It's an awesome responsibility, and it's one that I think most leaders in the military are extremely well trained for. But the word kids is interesting because it wasn't until I wrote this book, and I went back through it, and I kind of did the math, and I read the ages, because I kind of give their ages, kind of how I write my style.
All
and
very
it
young.
was 18, 19, maybe 22 years old, and there's an entire story about Sergeant Jonathan Espinoza in the book, and
He got shot in the chest.
he got shot in the chest during my deployment, and it's an amazing story.
It is an amazing
he
story.
He was in the first Battle of Ramadi in 04 at age 19, and then comes back a couple years later, and now he's this salty, seasoned sergeant, the sergeant of Marines, right? You envision this guy. He's a sergeant in the Marine Corps. No, he's 22 years old. You think about the amount of experience that guy's digested in that amount of time.
That's insane.
I compare that to what I was tasking these young men to do, to perform these superhuman acts day in and day out in the face of great danger, at the same time surrounded by complete uncertainty. And I never really realized that. I didn't see the 22-year-old Sergeant
time?
Johnson. All I saw was Sergeant Johnson. You're like, you will do this. And it wasn't until you gain that experience and age, and along with that comes a little wisdom, that you really understand that you could use that word kids, but the Marine Corps and the military have such an amazing system of training and such phenomenal leaders at every single level, not just officers, but senior enlisted guys too, that they prepare these young men and women to make that rapid transition from you're not in high school anymore. These last 13 service members that got killed in Afghanistan, which was a tragedy that I think was somewhat preventable, they weren't kids. They were young. They were young adults, but they all were doing what they loved to do. And that's something that I never forgot as I was out on the battlefield day in and day out with the men of Echo Company.
And you say they love to do you feel partly because, we're talking about the Marines right now, and, grunt as you put it, you're bred for that? It's a culture that's bred in you?
I think that...
Because you go from, let's just say I joined Effort High School, right? You go from, I'm in high school, maybe I shot a weapon, maybe my dad took me on the range, or I went hunting, but you're not practicing tactics. And you go from that to now it is my job to go kill the enemy.
Yeah.
Does that have, when you say they're born for it, is it partly because they're raised?
I don't say they're born for it, but I think that the men and women that serve in the military or in law enforcement, or they become first responders, there's something in those people that makes them protectors. There's something in their backgrounds, and most come from some sort of troubled home. And I don't have a PhD in my wall. I've never done a thesis on this, but they're almost looking for some sort of stability,
connection to something, maybe,
and a connection and discipline and a regiment that they almost won't ask for, but they get. And I think the military especially is very lucky to draw those people in. I don't know how it is. Maybe it's some secret laboratory in the recruiting commands that they figured this out. But what's interesting too is I'm writing another book right now, and I'm doing some interviews. And one of the characters, this real life character in the book, he goes into this in-depth interview. He says, "Man, I never wanted to fly an attack helicopter in the Marine Corps. I never even wanted to join the Marine Corps." And he goes through and tells me his family background. It's a very nuclear family, mom and dad and sister and brother. And I asked him what he wanted to do. He says, "Well, I really wanted to be a veterinarian." And right there, I thought, although it didn't apply to humans, you still had something in you that you wanted to help others. And I think that despite whatever your ethos is in the Marine Corps, the Army, or the Navy, it's honor, courage, commitment. It's also helping those that can't help themselves. I think that's really at the core of what people who, at age 18, raise their hand and say, "I'm willing to put my life on the line to take care of those that can't take care of themselves." I mean, who does that? I think it's a very rare segment of the American population.
Being in charge of taking an entire company of infantry to Iraq, you knew conceptually, and more than conceptually, what you were getting into. I mean, what kept you up at night? I mean, I'm sure it wasn't like, "Oh, do we have enough bullets?" I mean, what emotionally kept you up at night? Like, "Oh shit, I'm leading this charge to Iraq."
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me what keeps me up at night. Pete asked me that every once in a while, but
well, back then, I want to know, right?
Then.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, I mean, I can't even imagine.
I think the thing that always weighed on me was, did they understand my commander's intent? And that's a thing that we train Marines for, and the Army, is this decentralized command. So in the absence of senior, more experienced command, has your intent, what you hope they will do in your absence, going to happen? Because in an urban environment, and we'll talk about Ramadi specifically, this very congested area with the most heavily populated insurgent force in 2006 and 2007, there was absolutely no way I could be everywhere at all times.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's my very next question, but keep going. I'm going to move into that.
So, I always envisioned writing my command philosophy so it was easily digestible and, moreover, remembered at the lowest level. I didn't want this to be some page-long soliloquy that was plastered over the urinals in the bathroom, and I've got my my profile shot up there, and they're not reading it, or they're drawing mustaches on the picture. I wanted it to be easily remembered, and it was simple. It was, we will train hard, we will fight, and we will win. That was my command philosophy. And at the end of the day, I saw Lance Corporals Johnson and Heusing sitting in some shithole in a third world country fighting the enemy, and things are getting really bad. And Johnson says to Heusing, he's like, "Man, it's getting pretty bad over here." I said, "Yeah, what do you think the CO would want us to do?" What would he want us to do?
Train hard, fight, and win.
Win. And all of that other ancillary training, all of that entry-level training and advanced level training, that's what would kick in, and that's what would carry those guys to go home and see their families.
Well, I didn't memorize it. I didn't. You bring up Espinosa real quick, and you'll read it more in your book. He got shot in the chest. He got, immediately, I'm going to say medevaced, but, hauled off to the initial, casualty collection point, or that hospital. They then, I think, airlifted him somewhere else. He's passing out on the helicopter. Dude on the helicopter has the paddles, about ready to shock him. He wakes up in the helicopter, lands at the hospital, surgery, Superman pillow, and 2 days later, he leaves and comes, nobody told him to do so, comes back to the unit to start fighting again, all on his own. Holy fuck.
It's a story.
Did I get that right, by the way?
It's a story that
I read it, and I'm
you
just like,
think would only happen in movies.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
but it happened in real life. And when I wrote Echo in Ramadi, I did over 100 interviews with not only the Marines and soldiers that I fought alongside, but also the families. And
I know, wow.
And when I called Jonathan Espinoza, who, for the record, is not a real chatty Cathy. He's a businessman. I mean, the Marines feared this guy. He was all business all the time, and one of the best leaders I've ever met. And so when I finally explained to him what I was doing, I was writing the story about the fight, and I finally shut up, he talked for maybe 2 hours straight, and I just sat there at my computer and typed and wrote notes. And it got so big, the actual chapter grew to about 8,500 words. And when I got it to my editor, she goes, "This is way too long." So we kind of parsed it up to make it a little bit more digestible for the reader. But what is great too is just recently, it was probably 2 years ago, I was at Camp Pendleton, California, and then no, I was at his promotion ceremony to First Sergeant.
He's First Sergeant now?
He's First Sergeant. So continue to do great things, continuing to lead Marines and set the example and share all that experience with him, with others. So
you talk about commander's intent. And this is what I want to know, what's going through your head, because well, I'm going to read this, and then I want to get your thoughts on it. I'm going to bounce between about 2 or 3 pages, so just bear with me for a second. Lance Corporal Jonathan Naris, excuse me if I pronounced that wrong, a fire team leader in 4th Platoon, 1st Squad, raced to the rooftop of ECP-8. He could see the muzzle flashes of the insurgents' weapons coming out of the windows as close as 50 meters away. Naris and the other Marines drew down on the insurgents, aiming their sights on the enemy fighters running back and forth between buildings. As Marines spotted them, they opened up their weapons. The firing was intense. Deafening bursts rang out of the 249 squad automatic weapon, better known as a SAW, and a 249 Bravo, which is a 7.62 millimeter machine gun, making it almost impossible to communicate to each other as they fought. Naris could see the bodies of insurgents drop to the ground as the Marines tore them apart. One more thing, bear with me. There is a method to my madness. Once inside ECP-8, I saw the radio operator, Lance Corporal Christopher Muscle, monitoring the tactical radio nets. He told me that OP South House and OP Hotel were getting into it hard, and the Marines would need an ammunition resupply soon. Last thing I'll say. I picked up the handset of the radio and called the task force operations officer, Major Jared Norrell. Again, excuse me if I pronounced that wrong. I requested that he send the tank QRF to my position. QRF is Quick Reaction Force, which is backup, if you will. There's so much shit going on. You talk about, I can't hear anything. These guys are running out of bullets. We need backup. We need to call the QRF. How do you manage this? What's going through your head when you got 4 different platoon elements engaged in just complete, call it organized chaos? How do you manage this? It's almost like I relate it when I was reading that, okay, I run a couple businesses, I'm launching a product, I got vendors, I mean, how do you manage this from the command level?
Trust.
Trust?
Trust in your junior level leaders, that they are trained and are taking care of the Marines. And at my level, at any level of command, you have to become a force supplier. You have to make decisions based off of the best amount of information that you have at that time, and then make sure that you're enabling all of those forces, whether it's a 4-man team stuck on a rooftop somewhere to a platoon on patrol. You have to make sure that you are providing all the assets that's going to enable them to be successful in the mission you've ordered them to do. Because at the end of the day, they don't get to question that. They don't get to say, I don't want to take this mission. Yeah. Because as the commander, you're ordering them to do that. And as a force supplier, it's not just beans, bullets, and Band-Aids to make sure that they're taken care of. It's also all of those other things that really are intrinsic to a urban environment when you're operating amongst a population. You've got military working dogs, you've got transportation requirements, you've got interpreters to deal with, you've got close air support to deal with, you've got rotary wing aircraft, fixed wing aircraft. Do I have to drop a bomb on this house? How close is this house and the bomb when it explodes to friendly forces? Because we were one company of about 200, and anywhere from 250, I think we had up to almost 280 something Marine soldiers and sailors, and anybody that was a card carrying member of the club that could carry a weapon and get out on patrol, to include contractors and some civilian, the interpreters that were with us, and MWDs, the working dogs, intelligence guys, they were all out there with us. So you just have to have all of that situational awareness at all times.
But then you're taking feedback, like you said, from your color lieutenants, or you're getting all this feedback and then just managing it, so to speak?
I think, I get asked about this a lot as I go around the country and I talk about leadership. What makes you a great leader? And I probably learned this later in life than I should have, and that is be a good listener. Be a good listener. And I think that there's a time for listen, there's also a time for action, especially in a combat environment where you have to make split-second decisions that ultimately impact the lives of hundreds of people. You can't always just stop and listen, have this esoteric discussion when you're slinging lead and people are dying.
Or you're on top of a tank.
Yeah, exactly.
So were you, the position you were in, were you in a constant trying to just oversee everything going on and manage the entire situation? I mean, there are times, okay, I might die right here and now, and I got to do something right here to that thing right there. But was it more overall just managing the entire situation when you get into gunfights like that?
Yeah, I think it's a crude analogy, but as a commander, you have to place yourself at the 30,000 foot level, because as a leader, you have to maintain visibility of the entire picture. When you allow yourself to get dragged down to ground level and your vision gets narrowed,
you're screwed.
Well, you're screwed, but really those who you're leading should be asking the question, hey, yeah, it's cool to be in a fighting position or up on a tank shooting bad guys and slinging lead. But if we're both in that position and you're Lance Corporal Johnson and I'm Captain Heusing, and you look to your right and you say, hey, if the CO is here slinging lead with me, who's running the company? If the pilot of the plane is in back grabbing drinks with the stewardess, who's flying the plane? So you have to stay at that level and be cognizant of where you're at all times, because if you're not, you're really not serving those who's entrusted their lives to your command.
Was it did you make a very conscious effort on what type of bond you built with your men? I mean, let me rephrase. Obviously, you build a bond, but how much on a personal level did you get with them, close to them? Was that ever a thing?
Well, I was prior enlisted, so I enlisted in the Marine Corps and then went to college, got my commission, and we call that a Mustang in the Marine Corps. I don't know. I think they call it that in the Army too. But
yeah, my dad called you that last night. I was telling him you were going on the show.
Yeah, so a Mustang is a horse of a couple different breeds. Right. So I was enlisted and an officer, and a lot of people ask me, well, did that make you a better officer? And my answer is always the same. No, it did not. It did not make me a better officer.
Why is that?
Because being enlisted just gives you better perspective. I think it gave me better perspective. Most importantly, how valuable an individual Marine's time is. How I didn't ever want that squandered, whether it's in training or in combat. If they weren't fighting, they should be resting or prepping for the next battle. If they were in training, they shouldn't be doing mindless inspections or mindless things or wasting time in formations. They should be relaxing or studying or improving themselves physically and always doing things that enhance their warfighting capability. And that's one of the things I learned, not just from other great leaders that I was surrounded with throughout my career, which spanned over 24 years, but also examples of bad leaders. I never just said, these guys were bad and I wanted to block that memory out of my head. They really served as examples of what not to do. And I think that when you have a position of authority to really make those decisions that impact people's lives, I think that bond and that connection you have with people is important. And I always made this abundantly clear. And I'll share a story with a character that's in the book, Brian McKibben. He was a great guy. Now he's actually still on active duty. He's Gunnery Sergeant Brian McKibben now. And I was out doing the book tour or something, and we've become friends over the years. And I actually had him at a panel discussion in Charleston, South Carolina on the USS Yorktown. And he was kind of offended when I told him that we weren't friends back then. He goes, well, sir, I always thought you were a friend. I said, I wasn't your friend. I said, you got enough friends. You've only got one commander.
Right.
And I was never there to be their friend.
That's what I was getting, yeah.
And
right.
I think that's something important, that it's not a popularity contest. Your popularity comes from your level of expertise as a commander or as an officer or as an enlisted Marine, how well you learn the tools of your trade and how you apply those, how judicious you are, how fair you are in administering punishment to those who need to be punished at times. And it's not ever a thing where you punish Marines because they are young, they're going to screw up. But I always explained this when I had to dole that out, and it's the worst part of the job. But I said, man, I'm not doing this because it's anything you did. I'm doing this in fairness to the other 300 guys that are doing the right thing. You got to understand that.
And people want good leadership. They especially Marine, I'm guessing, when I was that young and when I was in the military, you want a leader to step up and say, this is what we're doing. This is the intent, and then lay it out. They want good leadership.
I think people want decisive leadership. They don't want hasty decisions,
right.
But they want decisive
somebody
leadership.
To make a call.
And I get asked to do a lot of leadership stuff, and I will say this: I failed often, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of people struggle with is sharing the failures. I think that no one wants, especially when you're in command, you wear a certain mask of command because that's how we're trained. I think that's what's expected. But when you move past that, when you're not in command, sharing the failures, not just the wins and all the sexy firefights and killing bad guys and kicking doors in and all the victories, really getting to a point in your life where you can share those failures with people so they learn those lessons. Because I truly believe this, man, is if you're not willing to share the failures with this younger generation, you've now become part of the problem. And I think that when we get in a society where everything's this instant gratification on Instagram and social media or news media, that it's all the good stuff, or you're inundated with all the bad stuff, it's still not teaching you the really valuable lessons of, well, what led to that failure? And being humble enough to explain that, I think, is something that, again, it's not an original idea, dude. I gained that from so many amazing people that I served with and for throughout my career, friends who are civilians, not necessarily solely military people, and listening to them and understanding that that's really the secret to success.
How was your transition out of the Marines?
I think it was pretty easy.
Yeah?
I like to think
That's the first time I've heard that.
No, I think it was pretty easy. I was excited. You'll see a lot of commentary from people transitioning out of the military that, oh, I'm scared or nervous about my next step or my next chapter in life. Seems to be what's written most on LinkedIn and all of these platforms. But I always reassure people, I said, man, don't be scared. You're a fucking Marine, man. You got nothing to be scared of. Be excited. Be excited about this next mission, this next chapter of your life. That should be your mindset moving forward. And so I was always really excited about that. I always prepared myself for it.
So did you have a plan getting out?
Absolutely.
What was it?
Absolutely. I wanted to move into a career that I enjoyed or a job that I enjoyed. And one of the things I learned was this, is when you spend 24 years in one organization, you're almost geared to think, I got to do this for the next 20 years.
I know where you're going.
But the good news is for anyone transitioning at anything, this does not apply to the military because I speak to a lot of corporate engagements, is you can transition after 1 year or 2 years. All of that experience is a transition, and every time you transition, that makes you a better person. Even if you get shit canned from a job and you get fired, that's a transition, and you can almost use it as a positive. Now I know exactly what I don't want. I absolutely don't want to work there, although you thought you did when you got hired.
Right.
So there's important lessons that you can glean from that. But I think my transition to the private sector has been relatively easy, and I also maintain a lot of continuity with the military because I do so much work in the nonprofit sector as the executive director of SaveTheBrave.org, which helps connect veterans who are struggling with post-traumatic stress, who've dealt with a lot of combat. I stay connected through the 2-4 Association and volunteering a lot of philanthropic work. So that bond is always there. I mean, I talk to you, I call you, and we communicate so that the absence of the shared misery and the laughter and the jocularity we all have when we're on active duty, it doesn't really dissipate.
So to that point, though, do you think then people that get out and you say something, I mean, part of me doesn't even want to read this because, you're talking about, we get out and then memorials. Other Marines swarmed around their broken comrades, wrapping their arms around their backs, supporting each other and trying to fight off their own tears. Some of the Marines stood paralyzed by emotion in front of the pedestals, unable to leave. You're talking about a memorial and talking about a lot of Marines can just now, I don't know, what is it, acknowledge their feelings, recognize their feelings, feel their feelings, because when you're fighting in war, you can't stop and say, Libby, all these other guys, and recognize that. Do you feel that a lot of these people are just starting to recognize their feelings? And then do you think that's why, and correct me if I'm wrong, you talk in here a little bit about one of your Marines committed suicide, I think.
Simon Litke. He's the whole reason we started SaveTheBrave.org.
So I want to get into that, but do you think then there a lot of veterans getting out and they're just now starting to really get in touch with their feelings because they couldn't, but it wasn't the right time, and they're out now, so it's now let me start feeling this.
We are great at a lot of things as Marines, and we're also great at compartmentalizing trauma. But we don't own the definitions of those words in the military. You know this, like trauma or service or sacrifice. Everybody deals with trauma and stress in their life, and we're trained to compartmentalize that. And we're about to hit another significant point in this sine wave of service where all of my peers, all my contemporaries, these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have been closed down. They've stayed on active duty. So I'm about to brace for impact for that wave of service members that get out, where they got to unpack all this. And I like to use an analogy. It's like this jar full of jam. It's all of those pieces of trauma. You just put the lid on, you screw it tight, and you put it in the pantry, you put it on a shelf, you close the door, and you just put it away. You back it out, and you go on with your life. You're still a good Marine, you're still a good soldier, you do your job. But that is still there. It's still a part of who you are. But in everybody's life, man, the ground will shake eventually. And when you transition out of the military and you don't have all that support, or you're not driven to do all these things at such a rapid pace you do in the military, if the ground shakes enough, that jar falls off and will smash to the ground and break, and that jam, that mass that's inside is going to ooze through the door. But we're lucky in this day and age, unlike our Vietnam era veterans. I think that we've developed, and especially through SaveTheBrave.org, over the past 6 years, we've developed this robust structure that really helps enable veterans to cope with that as a safety net.
How do you do that?
By connecting veterans in a safe space through outreach programs and really allowing them to stay in touch, where before it seemed to be more continued isolation of those problems from individuals, where they didn't have all these organizations. And SaveTheBrave.org is just one of maybe 45,000 veteran nonprofits registered with the IRS.
Correct.
But we like to think that we're part of the solution that's helping guys bridge that gap from what other nonprofits don't do and what the VA or government agencies are unwilling to do. And I think that we're lucky, and over the past 6 years, we've helped thousands.
So how do you actually bring them physically together? I mean, what's the program?
One of our biggest programs is offshore fishing in California. And it started 6 years ago after Simon Litke killed himself, and we decided, we got to do something. We can't just talk about it. There's people that do a lot of this, and then there's people that take action. And men and women of the military are people of action. And so that's what we did. And we've grown at the right rate, at the right speed, for the right reasons, for the right people. So we started that. We said, hey, let's do a fishing trip. That was over 6 years ago, one fishing trip. This year, 36 fishing trips.
Wow.
Not just in California, but now we're in Texas. Wow. Now we're moving to the Midwest and soon probably to Florida on the East Coast. So that shows you the type of growth that we've experienced at Save the Brave in the last 6 years.
That's all free for the service member?
100% free. And when I say that we are a 100% nonprofit, none of us take a salary. We do it all. All that money donated to SaveTheBrave.org goes straight to veteran programs, and that's something we're really proud of.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what do you see then in veterans that get out? I always call it your what's next. I don't know what to call it. I found my what's next. I've said it a million times. I happened to fall into entrepreneurship. I got out of the Army. I had one job for like 3 weeks. That was 2006. I haven't had a W-2. I haven't been on payroll since.
That's awesome.
Well, it could be awesome. I mean, for 5 years, I wondered where my dinner was going to come from when I was trying to get companies off the ground and whatnot. It was many years ago. But I found my what's next. And I think, I asked another guest on the show, if it weren't for the Army, would you still become a cop? Because he was a police officer. And he didn't know. And somebody would ask me, if it weren't for the Army, would I have become an entrepreneur? I don't know. But I think the Army led me to think like that a little bit. But what is it that some veterans can't find their what's next, or some struggle more than others? Is that just life and that's people, everybody struggles, or some find help, some don't?
You could be the most successful person in the world and you still struggle. It's how you cope with that and how you apply yourself. Anything I attribute to success in life is, one, the discipline that I learned from the Marine Corps at a very young age. Because this is no secret, it's not a true confession. I barely graduated high school. I had a 1.24 GPA. Anybody watches this show, in the comments, if you have less than a 1.24 GPA, I want to meet you. I'll give you a free book, I'll send you a coin or something, whatever you want. But I've never met anybody. So I was just a bit of a screw up. But the military helped me learn, that discipline, not self-discipline, but I think that whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you have a job in the private sector, is that discipline that you learn really enables you. But if there's people struggling, I think that just like you do and just like I do, you reach out to people and you stay connected. Mm-hmm. And I think, honestly, this is not hyperbole again. I really believe this. At the beginning and the end of every day, if you're not helping other people, man, you're just not helping yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think that whether I have struggles in my life or whatever I deal with, I think if I'm not helping other people, I'm not serving myself, and that's probably part of the fuel in my tank that keeps me moving forward to do what I do, not just as an entertainer, as a writer, or as a storyteller, but I think it was best when I was doing a podcast one time, and I got through the whole show, and this lady who's married to a Vietnam vet, she says, "Oh, I know you're this best-selling author, and you're doing films and this," and she goes, "But what do you do?" And then Pete Turner jumps in and he says, "I know the answer to that question." He says, "Scott's a connector." He shares his network. And I think that's like you and how we are all tied in is we know so many of the same people, but we never soccer mom those contacts. If you know somebody that's great at someone and you know me, if you send them my info, I'm not going to say, "Hey, why are you giving someone my info?" I know that you're a trusted agent. So right. I never worry about that. So if there's people that want, support, I think you just got to ask for it. But at the end of the day, we're not in the business of giving stuff to veterans. You're not entitled to shit. Mm-hmm. We're in the business of empowering veterans. When I rode my Harley across the country this year, again, 3,161 miles, I did that to empower other veterans. So they're in their state, they're in Illinois, they said, "You know what? I could ride my bike from Chicago to St. Louis and do my own run." Do it. Do what you're great at. Do a podcast. You know what? If some Army kid can, get out of a service and start his own podcast here, and he's got this kick-ass studio in Arizona, do it.
Do it.
There's nothing stopping you, but you have to do the work because no one's going to do it for you.
I feel like you're taking the words right out of my mouth. So to wrap this up, because I want to talk about Afghanistan real quick, but what did you learn from this? Why did you decide to write this book? I'm glad you did. I've read it twice, cover to cover. First time I read it, was I even doing the podcast at the time? I don't remember.
And you were talking about doing the podcast.
I was talking about doing the podcast. I mean, I buy a lot of books. I buy a lot of shirts from, part of it's to support people, 'cause, happy to do it. I've bought people your book. And when I read this, I mean, the first chapter, I mean, I felt it when you were talking about Libby and you had to come back to base, you took off your vest, you had to call. I mean, I felt that, the way you described it, but what made you write this?
I think it was an important story, not just from a historical perspective. I never wanted the Battle of Ramadi to fall under the shadows of the Fallujahs or the Kandahars or the Baghdads. It was absolutely one of the toughest fights the Marine Corps and the Army have had. And I worked for the Army in Ramadi, and that type of brotherhood we have. But I also wrote it for the Marines so that their sacrifice and service wouldn't be forgotten. And moreover, the families that supported us while we fought and the families today that still support us. 15 years, 16 years after we left that miserable place. I mean, they're still there for us. And some of those families lost Marines, and some of the families have lost Marines when we came back, those who've committed suicide and killed themselves. And, that sounds harsh, but, there's just no nice way to say that. When you...
Well, there's nothing nice about war.
You don't see that coming. You don't see the warning signs. And suicide is such a shit thing. It doesn't discriminate against age or race
Rank.
or branch of service or sex or gender. It doesn't have any of those things. And it leaves this huge gap, this wake of just emptiness behind when that happens. So we're in the business of preventing veteran suicide, not raising awareness. I could give a shit about waving a flag about, people are killing themselves. No, how do we prevent it? How do we stop veterans, those who we're tied to, from killing themselves? We think that we've found at least a small part of the solution, and that is staying connected.
Bringing back camaraderie,
Absolutely.
talking to people.
Letting them know that they're not alone. And I could share 1,000 examples, if not more, of how many great Americans, civilians, veterans are out there that want to not only throw a lifeline to guys who are struggling in the water, but jump off the fucking ship and try and pull them to safety. They're out there. They're out there. You've met them.
I've talked to them.
I've met them. They're out there, but it's. I think it's a tireless mission, and I think it's something that I'm very lucky to have the capacity to do, because not everybody has to barf their life into 300 pages of a book and stick it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble to read. Not everyone has to get on a stage in front of 10,000 strangers and pick open the scab every time and bleed. But I'm very fortunate to have that capacity for so many people that just can't. They can't do that. Maybe that's kind of a little superpower or something that some people have. But I'm no superhero. I just like sharing stories with one result in mind: helping other people. And trust me, man. I've heard it once or twice that you don't get rich writing books. You don't get rich doing all these things. Honestly, it may look cool on Facebook, but unless your name is Tom Clancy, that's really the only guy that's making money selling books, or James Patterson. But the stories that we share within the veteran community, I think, are essential, not just from a historical perspective, but from the human perspective.
It's one of the main reasons I started this podcast out of the blue last year, is to share these stories.
I got to tell you, so we get this on camera.
Yeah.
What you just said about sharing my book as a gift to someone else, that's probably one of the biggest compliments anyone could ever get.
Did. Bottom, yep. I've done it. It's one of the only books I've actually ever was talking to somebody and on the spot bust open Amazon and ordered the book for this guy.
Yeah.
And he came back months later. By the way, non-paid promotion. You said people don't get rich writing books. And again, I've read this book many times, even before the podcast, Echo in Ramadi. Please check it out. These stories have to be told 2 decades at war. I'm not going to say we're the greatest generation because we're not, but damn, we're a great generation. And when I say we, I mean the people you write about. I'm just some dude doing a podcast. But switch gears real quick as we wrap this up, man. There's a lot of shit going around on Afghanistan right now. I mean, especially and it's almost like when you said the veteran community, like when you're dialed into social media on the veteran community, it's almost like they just pop from every direction and everybody's got a voice and there's a lot of emotion. And, was the war worth it? Oh, this was a disgrace. And I mean, what are your thoughts on the ending of the Afghanistan war?
Well, no one's ever accused me of or labeled me as this eternal optimist, but there's so much negativity going on about the withdrawal and the evacuation of Kabul in Afghanistan and the closure of a 20-year war. I've been really dialed into a couple of things. One, the Commandant of the Marine Corps wrote a letter kind of supporting the guys and part of me wanted to say, well, we don't really need that. We really need clarity. We don't need condolences. No one needs assurances what we did, because at the tactical level, you fight for the Marines and soldiers on your left and right. And at the beginning and the end of every day, that's why you do it. You do it for your family so they remain safe. You do it unhesitatingly because you believe in this country. And everybody is quick to condemn the decisions of people at every level. But at the tactical level, I tell the veterans, like, you're winners. You absolutely won. If winning was defined, the metric of success was killing bad guys, trust me, we killed plenty of them. We were stacking bodies in Iraq and Afghanistan. We never were at a loss for targets, trust me. But what we've failed to do at the administrative level is really define what winning is. And we were talking about this earlier, is it's not the blame of one president, not 2, but 4 presidents never defined what winning was to the nation, never defined what winning was to those fighters on the battlefield at every level of command, never said, if we fight and kill all these people, we'll achieve this X. We never really got that. At the tactical level, all we ever understood was kill or capture anti-Iraqi fighters, kill or capture anti-Afghan fighters. That was our mission, and we executed that. But what did that mean as a nation? How did that enhance our national security? And I agree to some of the administrators that came out and say that our presence in Iraq and Afghanistan were not enhancing national security. If that's their perspective, great. Back it up with facts. So what's unfolded in Afghanistan, I think, is a gross example of not, one, having a clear exit strategy, because the military is great at a lot of things, and the Marines are experts at breaking stuff up. But what we're really, really bad at is building stuff up. So at the end of the day, we didn't have the right people in the right job for the right reasons to really develop that democracy or that vision that we set out for the Afghan people. And all of those things can only happen with, first, security. You can't have a democracy, you can't even plant a seed of democracy without security. And without security, you can't allow administrators to govern.
Which is why they're saying now 20 years of the war gone because there's no security in Afghanistan.
And whatever semblance of governance was there is now run for the hills or probably being killed as we speak and record this show in Afghanistan. But for the governance to be effective, to establish some form of democracy, to let that flourish, the right people weren't in there to build another key component of democracy, and that is
what?
Economy, economic throughput. And by removing that presence in Afghanistan and Iraq and the Middle East and that entire region we were trying to influence, and not just force democracy and Walmarts and Home Depots down their throats, which I wrote a pithy article about a few years ago, it really was to show them that there's hope, that there is a better way of life, there is freedom,
so that's
there is
one
choice.
Viewpoint going around, that throughout the 20 years in Afghanistan, we gave the Afghan people a vision of what could be. And now some say, it's on them now to step up to the plate, but they have a vision of what freedom could look like.
unfortunately, that's nothing but a bleak memory now, based off of all of the shallow promises made by the U.S. administrations along the way. And I use that in the plural, administrations, because you can't blame just one president. You can't blame just one administration. This is a systematic process that has to unfold over decades. And again, when there's no security, when there's no governance, when there's no sea lanes of communication open to a region, the industries of the world, not just American ones like the Walmarts and the Home Depots, they're not willing to risk a bottom line to go set up a store or a restaurant or a business or an industry when they know that it's just going to get overrun and corrupted.
If they even could
by
set
a culture
one up.
that is very at ease with corruption.
Ugh.
So that's unfortunately the position that we lie in today.
I could ask that what a crystal ball says for the next 10 years in Afghanistan, but that's a route I don't even want to go down. But crystal ball this, what does the next 5-7 years of our military look like? A lot of the combat experienced personnel are going to retire, separate, ETS, whatever have you. We've been trained as just to fight wars for 20 years. What does military in peacetime look like? I don't even know.
Yeah, that's a great question too. There is a sine wave of peace and war, height of conflict, bottom, stability, peace, and it goes. And we have seen our warfighters in every branch of service really at the median of that sine wave, because they've lived an entire lifetime at war. These kids that get killed in Afghanistan, 20 years old, they've been alive as long as this war's been going on. The senior and mid-level leaders have had the majority, if not the entirety of their careers at war.
Right.
So it really is going to beg the question then, how soon do we go back? Are we going to pull a General Douglas MacArthur, as he did in the Philippines in World War II, and say, I shall return? Where's that general? Where's that general right now? I shall return. To the people of Afghanistan, who we gave all this hope to, are we going to return and fulfill those promises and return? How long will it take us? Who knows? Will it be 10 years when we have all of that experience and knowledge of warfighting diminished because they've gotten out or retired or said, I don't want a part of this?
Wow.
Or do we do a quick turn? I think it was 2 years it took MacArthur and his staff, and he made that announcement, I think, from Australia. When is that? I don't know. Maybe I am a little optimistic that someone's going to step to the challenge.
I don't see that happening anytime soon. But
see it not just at the military level, but at the administrative level. And you know what, guys like you and me, and there's plenty of good examples of it, is if you really want to be part of the change, make a change, and encourage the right people to run for office. And then share it, support them, regardless of what state you live in, and help them get in office. We've got a lot of great veterans who really subscribe to that ethos of helping those that can't help themselves. And I think they're I don't want to say that they're uncorruptible, but I think that their mettle is a little bit tougher than someone that has never served, someone that's never.
Are you about to say, is this your announcement for run for office?
No, but I was just talking to a fellow Arizonan today on the phone. I was texting him while I was having coffee, Eli Crane.
Yeah.
He's running for Arizona's 1st District.
Down in Tucson, right?
So, hey, if you're watching the show, follow Eli Crane, owner of Bottle Breacher, entrepreneur, Navy SEAL, friend of mine.
Entrepreneur, cut from, definitely someone to back.
There's, and that community is pretty tight-knit. But again, take 1 minute out of your day to support someone else instead of posting a picture of yourself on Instagram. Hey, go visit this guy. Go visit, Sean Parnell, who's running in Pennsylvania for Congress. These are the people that, I get it, they're in my tribe, but there's a lot of people in this country that have never served, never worn the uniform that I would support as well. And I say again, we don't own the definitions of those words, service and sacrifice. You don't have to have fought in the deadliest city of Iraq to serve. You can do it in so many ways. You can volunteer for a nonprofit. You can run for office. You can go to a local charity. There's so many ways. We don't own the definition of those words. And I think that if you want to get involved, man, just be great at what you're great at.
So true. Well, I'm on a mission to tell stories, and I'm not going to stop through this podcast. Your book is clearly an example of telling stories. Check it out, Echo and Ramadi. SaveTheBrave.org, is it?
Yes, it is.
And Scott, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Appreciate you.